My presentation today is titled How to Evangelize People or those suffering from chronic godless life from psychological and theological perspectives. I think you agree with me that never ever was the world so divided like today. We have on one hand people who believe that nothing is more close to man as God, and nothing is so strange for us than living in a godless world. On the other hand, there are people who believe exactly the opposite, and for whom the faith and church and or trust in God is a fantasy or self-deception. And people like Freud thought that it is an illusion. Marx thought it is an opium. Friedrich Nietzsche thought, he was a famous philosopher in the 19th century, he called it a need. But there may be the first challenge is that of Dawkins, a modern challenge, who calls it a delusion. So there is a big difference between a delusion, which is something, believing something what is non-existence, and believing in a need. A need is not existing. A need is a literal form which can express deep truth, and a reality expressed in a mythological language, or an illusion, as Freud called religion.
Illusion is a false recognition, but it is something quite different than delusion. Now, the world is divided, and the worst thing is there is no communication between the two sides of the world, between the believers and the non-believers, as though we live in two different worlds. We speak the same language, belong the same culture, live sometimes in the same family, share the same continent, but simply we cannot communicate, cannot understand each other. The ideas like God, the church, or the faith have, for those who don't believe, a very different meaning. The word is the same, but the meaning of the word is very different. It was a philosopher in the 20th century, famous in Europe, Ludwig Wittgenstein. He was working with Bertrand Russell. And he comes from a very famous family. There were 5 brothers. 3 of them committed suicide. The 4th became a pianist, and the 5th became a big philosopher, this Wittgenstein. His father was the founder of the European steel industry before the World War I. And he groomed his children to inherit his empire. But there was no communication between them. They used the same words, but with different meanings. And this is what prompted the philosopher later to talk about different forms of living. He and his parent had a different forms of life. They used the same words, but with different meaning. So God meant one thing for a believer and something very different for a non-believer. And this philosopher Wittgenstein wrote that, for example, if a lion could talk, he could understand us, but he could understand what we say, but not the message, not the meaning. A lion could understand why we pay tax, why we go to church, for example, why we have health insurance, because a lion has a different form of living. He could understand the word, but not the message. Now let me illustrate now how significant this difference is. Let me illustrate with understanding of the church or God or religion between the believers and the non-believers. The basic understanding for us is that our life has a meaning, it has a value, that we are created in God's image and likeness. But the non-believer experiences exactly the same. I'm a natural phenomenon if I don't believe in God. My life has no more meaning than a natural event, like burning of a candle, for example. Nothing more and nothing more important than a natural happening. Okay, if I'm only a natural happening, then my life is not only meaningless, I'm unlovable, because you don't love a natural phenomenon. I am unlovable. There is nobody to take care of me. There is no providence. And this way of living lives. It is self-sustaining. However, the church is a challenge. It is a challenge because there are people who believe the opposite. And there are people who are witnessing that no, we have a living relationship with God. It is a challenge. It is an annoyance. Nothing is more painful than the feeling I'm left out. You can have a relationship with God, but I cannot. Nothing is more painful, nothing is more disturbing for a Homo sapiens than this being left out from God's care and God's love. So they defend themselves. How they do defend themselves? They say, if I don't feel God, if I don't communicate with God, you cannot either. You are deceiving yourself. But not only this, then comes the pathologizing. It is a delusion, it is a fantasy, and so on and so on. The church has a very different meaning in this vocabulary. For us, it is the body of Christ. It is there are many 5, 6 definitions in the Bible. It is the most holy institution. It is a holy mystery imbued with a hidden presence of God, like Paul VI defined it. It is the most holy and mysterious thing we can imagine. Why, for them, the same word church means a self-deceptive or hypocritical institution like others. So, 1,000 years ago, the scholastic had a moral argument supporting God and proving God's existence. Now, the agnostics and atheists make a moral counter-argument. Since the church is doing this, like the Inquisition and the Crusades and the child abuse today, God is not present at all in it. So the church means, the same word means for them a very, very different meaning, different thing. Maybe it seems to you that it is insignificant what I'm talking here. But let me prove that it is very significant. Let me start with Freud. It is well known, Freud had a patient who was depressed. A young lady had a cancer. And she thought her life has no meaning because it will not last very long. And she came to Freud and asked his help. And Freud told her in a style, "Oh, my young lady, you are in a big mistake. Your life had never a meaning. So the life has no meaning at all." Now you can imagine how happy this lady was and how much Freud helped to her. No, she committed suicide later on. Or I can give you an example from my own practice. When I was a young man, many years ago, I started working as a young psychiatrist, a resident. And it came to me one day a man who attempted suicide, and he was laying on the stretcher without consciousness, and the older physician told he will die. But I thought, I will now prove myself. And really, I fought very hard and gave this and tried that and so on and so on. And after 2 or 3 hours, he opened his eyes. And then I expected the great moment that everyone will clap and he will say, thank you for saving me and so on. But no, he looked at me and he asked, why did you save me? Why must I live? Well, why must you live? What should I say to this? I was confused. My whole medical training didn't teach me what to say in those situations. So I told him something banal, that many nice girls are waiting for you or whatever, and he was admitted to the psychiatry. However, 2 or 3 days, very quickly he was released. He was not psychotic, he was not depressed, he was a normal man. And he attempted suicide the second time, and this time he succeeded. And I was perplexed with the question, what should I have said to him? How should I have helped to him, and what response should I give him? This is not a medical question. Is it a philosophical question? But I felt it is my duty to help him somehow. So this is what I call suffering of godless life. Okay, not I call it, Viktor Frankl called it so. So this is the suffering of godless life. I will read you now another example, which is well known in psychiatry. You can find it in psychiatric books described. It happened in 1905. The son-in-law of Karl Marx. Karl Marx was the founder of the communist movement in Europe, and his son-in-law, his name was Paul Lafargue. He was a Frenchman. And he killed himself when he was 70 years old. And he left a letter. And he wrote, I'm giving up my life as a healthy 70-year-old man before old age, which has taken away from me, one after the other, many pleasures and joys, can paralyze my energy, break my will, and make me a burden to others. As a young couple, my wife and I promised each other that we would not live beyond my current age. In a good time, I have prepared an ampoule of cyanide. Should I read it again? No, you understand the message. He was 70 years old. He felt that he is slowly sinking. And to prevent his slow disintegration, what comes with age, unavoidable, he killed himself. Now, this is suffering of godless life. Yes, it is significant. Yes, it is the main problem of our culture today. I was a few years ago in a psychiatric meeting, and you shouldn't take this literally what I'm saying, but metaphorically. One of the presenters told the number of suicides doubled, the number of divorces tripled, the number of drug abuse quadrupled, the number of single parents families quintupled, and so on and so on and so on. So this is the pathology of our life, of our current situation. I'm not saying that 100 or 1,000 years ago it was better. No. God's kingdom is slowly progressing. 1,000 years ago, it was much, much worse. Or 500 years ago, it was much, much worse. But this is the problem of our time, this godless life. Okay? It was a joke. You can hear sometimes on those professional meetings. We have, there is a DSM-4. This is a diagnostic statistic manual. And now it is the 4th edition. And it has to be revised. They are revising. This is the 4th edition, what we have now. And the joke sounds like this. We have to have the DSM-5 soon, but not later than, let's say, 2019. Indeed, you ask, why until 2019? Because after that day, there will be no normal people at all. So, indeed, it is a joke, okay? But it is expressing a truth, a very deep truth, that yes, the world population, the whole suffering of chronic godless life is a very, very important problem, that it is a significant burden to not only to the mental health, but to the modern humankind. I'm repeating myself. I'm not saying that God's kingdom is not fulfilling. I'm not saying that the world is not more and more impregnated, and the church especially is not impregnated more and more with God's love. We are in much better situation today than it was 1,000 years ago. However, this is the challenge of our time. This is what I called, or Frankl called, suffering of chronic godless life. Now, let's try to discuss what could be our approach, how to evangelize people who have a different idea, different experience, different vocabulary. Everything is different way of thinking. And if you say them God, they will understand the word, but have a very different experience, and they have a very different opinion about it. So how to approach those people? How can we witness God's kingdom to those people? It is more easy how not to do it. It was easy to believe 10,000 years ago. Blowing of the wind or thundering or whatever, or the big rain, meant God is angry. You had immediately a proof God is here and God is watching me and God is angry. Okay? Even 1,000 years ago. 1,000 years ago, people believed that the sun is moving on the sky from west to east because God's angels are pushing it on the sky. The sky is shining, so we cannot see the white angels, but the white angels are there and pushing the sun, and that was a collective belief. And people, when they looked on the sky, immediately had the proof. God is there. God is managing the universe, and God is moving the whole universe according to his wishes. Okay, then came Galilei, and everything has fallen apart. And we don't see God's angels anymore, but we see anonymous physical and chemical and astronomical and mathematical rules. And we cannot return to this way of thinking. It has no power in the modern world. You cannot use arguments like this to evangelize people suffering of godless life. Yes, the church or the believers have other arguments. We have philosophical arguments. Let me illustrate this with St. Anselm's proof, the ontological proof. 1,000 years ago, the first great scholastic, St. Anselmo, he invented the ontological proof. The essence and his purpose was this, that he can immediately prove to everyone that God exists. independently of your previous interest or knowledge or will to accept God or whatever, he can prove you that God exists. I don't know if you are aware how the proof goes. It is short. It goes like this. I can think the greatest thought in my head, but God is even greater than this, because he is not a thought only, but exists in the reality. Since I can think the greatest thought, and God is even greater than this, so he has to exist. Well, there is a logic in it. And most or many people believe that yes, the proof is valid. But how many of you are convinced by it, touched by it? How many people on the street can be converted or evangelized by this? I'm very doubtful that people will be not interested in it. It will, yes, people are not challenged by logic. People are not challenged by philosophy anymore. The time of great philosophers, of influential great philosophers, it seems it is gone. In the 18th century, it was, let's say so, the last great philosopher, Immanuel Kant. Well, I will not go now in Kantian philosophy, but what was the consequence of the Kantian thinking is what we call today positivism. Positivism means I believe only this, what I can see, touch, and measure, what positively exists. I see this, I can touch it, I can measure it, so it exists. I believe that it is. Nothing what I cannot see, touch, and measure, I don't believe. This doesn't exist for me. This is the positivistic thinking. And Auguste Comte, the founder of the positivism, divided the whole history of humankind in three periods. One was the religious, when people believed in God or gods. The second was the metaphysical, when people philosophized and thought about metaphysics, what is beyond physics, what is beyond what I can see, touch, and measure. And the third period is the positive, when I believe only this, what I can see, touch, and measure. And this is the period where we live now. Comte wrote this when 200 years ago, 250 years ago. But it is frightening how much he had right, how much really the philosophy and the whole human awareness evolved in this direction, in a positivist direction. So we live today in a positivist world. And this positivist world has different way of thinking, different way of understanding the whole life than before. Let me illustrate this with an example again. When I was a medical student, then we had to make an experiment. We had to, well, it sounds bad, but I will tell you. So we have to make a frog to sleep. We anesthetized the frog, and the frog was sleeping. Then he took out his heart. When we put the frog's heart in a physiological solution, his heart was beating. Then we had to take out the heart muscle. When we put the heart muscle in a physiological solution, it was contracting. And then our teacher told, now you can continue, and you can separate the heart muscle, the molecules of the heart muscle, and then you can separate the atoms of the heart muscle. Okay, but you can reverse the experiment, and you can put it together. So you put every atom on its place. You put every molecule on its place. You put every tissue on its place. You put the heart together, and you put the heart back in the frog, and the frog will be then a really living frog. There is no mystery in life, with other words. This is the modern medical understanding. Well, I'm not saying that there are no religious physicians. I'm not saying this at all. They have different insight, but they are not suffering of this godless life. I'm talking about this suffering of godless life. This is their understanding of life. It is nothing meaningful, mysterious in it. It is a line of physical and chemical happenings, nothing more. Okay, now we are back to the question, how to evangelize those people? How to convert them? How to have a dialogue with them? How to engage in a communication with them at all? Well, it is a difficult question, but let me, if I challenge you enough, then let me now try to give the answer. If you read the Bible, Jesus didn't give proofs. He didn't give mathematical proofs. He didn't give scientific proofs. He didn't give philosophical proofs for his teaching. This was not his way of evangelizing. Also, the early disciples didn't use philosophy or mathematics or science. They used a very different approach. What was the essence of their approach? Also, the early church didn't use philosophy or science or positive arguments. They used a very different arguments. So what is the essence of the way of thinking and arguing and convincing and evangelizing that the church used from Jesus' times until today? Well, let me try to answer this difficult question with St. Augustine's words. St. Augustine wrote, "If you would like to discern God, you have to look inside and not to analyze the external world. So we discern God not outside of us, but inside of us. The faith and communication with God happens not outside, not in mathematics, not in physics, not in chemistry, not in biology, not in any positive science. It happens in us. And it will happen in us or nowhere else." Okay, but let me ask now a difficult question. If it happens in us, is it subjective? Is it unreliable? Is it a deception? Is it an illusion? Is it a delusion? Is it a fantasy? Well, let me answer now this at first. Well, if he could deceive himself, Judas wouldn't kill himself. If he could deceive himself, King David wouldn't repent. If he could deceive himself, then the prodigal son wouldn't come back to his father. But no, they couldn't. For a man or a woman, so for a person who is suffering of depression, it has no purpose to argue, "Oh, this is only your subjective feeling. I cannot see, I cannot touch, I cannot measure your depression, so it is nothing." No way. For the one who feels in him or herself, nothing is more safe, nothing is more secure, nothing is more convincing than this, what I feel in myself, what I experience in myself. I'm not talking only about feelings. I'm talking about experiences. There is a big difference between the feeling and the experience. The feeling is an emotion. Yes, it is often subjective. Yes, it is reflecting the dark side of our personality sometimes. But the experience includes also feelings and also rational thinking and also logic and also will, and also attention, and all other psychological functions. So I'm talking about experiences. And if I experience guilt, then this is a reality for me. If I experience hope, it is a reality for me. If I love, it is a reality for me. It is probably the most important reality. Nothing is more important than this, what I experience in myself. Okay, now let me think and challenge myself with the devil's advocate's words. So, can we build our evangelization on subjective experiences? How really convincing are they? How really objective are they? With other words, have I to deceive myself to be in love? Have I to be blind to love someone? No, the love is discerning. I see the hidden qualities in another person which nobody else can see, but only I who love. Love makes me to see. For an anonymous person, I can see his or her positive characteristics, how tall, how heavy, or whatever he or she is. But only love makes me to see the invisible but real values in a person. Well, now we are coming back to, let's say, the disciples walking on the road to Emmaus. They saw Jesus, but they couldn't recognize him. Until Jesus didn't give them to recognize them. When their hearts were burning, then they could recognize Jesus. Then they could recognize a real reality, which an objective person, an objective observer, cannot realize, cannot discern. Okay? In the Old Testament is written that people know each other, learn to know each other in love, when they are close to each other. Then you know only the hidden qualities of another person, which really exist, which really count, which really are the characteristics of this person. But only a loving person can discern them. Okay, now someone could ask, yeah, but there are so many disappointments in love. So doesn't this mean an unreliability? If so people are disappointed in love, then what is the value? What is the reliability and the validity of love? How valid is my recognition through love? Well, people are disappointed in love, not because love is unreliable, but they are trying to transgress the laws and principles how you can love a person. I don't know if you understand what I mean. If I could stretch love, and I could be subjective and deceitful, and I could deceive myself or my partner, then I would be never disappointed. Then there would be no divorces. Then there would be no problems in any relationship, because everyone deceives himself. I'm happy, I'm satisfied, I'm in the seventh heaven. Okay? But because we cannot transgress the objective rules and principles and laws, how love is, this is the reason that there are disappointments in love. As one poet said, the logic of the love is razor sharp. We cannot deceive ourselves. We have to discern it or lose it. There is no other way. Now, the same is in faith. I cannot have faith whatever I will, because then I will not get what the faith gives. I will not receive the gifts what the faith gives. My heart will not burn. I will not be able to cry out like Thomas, that my Lord and my God, if I don't follow Jesus and go after him. Indeed, there are many questions here, and please challenge me in the discussion. And I will not harass you with this and not go in small details and discuss every implication. But if there is insecurity in this area, if the objective, if the internal recognition is important and valid, then please let's discuss it. So what I'm saying is this. I recognize the reality, the world, on two ways. One is I see you. The other is I see what is in me. I see myself with internal eyes, as St. Augustine wrote. So I'm watching the world with external eyes and internal eyes. Now, watching myself with internal eyes makes me and helps me to recognize God, to feel love, to feel His love, to experience His presence, to experience His providence, and so on and so on. It is like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If I love someone, if I have faith in someone, then I will experience what I have in myself, in that person. Okay. Let us now discuss how this works in practice. It is a theological doctrine that always is God the first who is calling humans. So always God is the first who calls humans. But how is God calling? How we know that God is calling us? How is God active in our life? Let me illustrate this with an example of a famous name, Solzhenitsyn. Solzhenitsyn was a great Russian writer, if you remember, but this is not the writer's story, but another person who has the same name. So this Solzhenitsyn lived in Russia, and he worked as a researcher. So as a researcher, he had a passport and he could travel all around the world. And once he got an invitation to give a presentation in a foreign country, in a Western country. But at that time, it was an iron curtain. So he could travel, he had the passport, but to prevent spreading the technological information, he had to go to a party examination to get the permission to travel abroad and to give the presentation. And in his description, he didn't want to be a black sheep and to challenge and to be conspicuous, so he went without it. As every other citizen, he took his passport and traveled to West. And there he gave his presentation, and it went everything very well. And after the presentation, he was invited to have a dinner. And at the dinner table, he met a journalist, and they started talking. And in the conversation, he told that the journalist asked about his name and so on, and his dialect and whatever, and he told that he came from Russia and so on. Now, he went home. He wrote, immediately after crossing the border, he realized, I made a terrible mistake. If it comes in the newspaper that I was there without a permission, then I'm in a big trouble. So he immediately phoned his host to tell him that no, stop the journalist, he cannot write about me. But no, it was too late. It already was printed in the local paper, the university paper. So he was waiting what will happen. It happened for a month, nothing. And then he was invited to a examination, to a party examination. And he knew that he made a mistake first. Secondly, the Communist Party at that time was all-powerful. They could fire him, they could proclaim him incompetent or insane or whatever, that he had no defense. So the examination, as he describes, was held on the 7th floor in a big building, and he arrived earlier and took the staircase and started walking to the 7th floor. And he was sweating and his heart was beating and whatever. He was mortified, with one word. And when he came to the 3rd or 4th floor, then he thought in himself, okay, the communists are more powerful. They can crush me. They can humiliate me. They can fire me. They can proclaim me incompetent. They can proclaim me insane or whatever. But all this doesn't change that I'm right, that I'm doing the right thing, that I'm on God's side because he was a religious man. This doesn't change that God will help me to overcome. And at the end, I will defeat, not I will defeat, but I will survive this. And I'm doing the right thing. And this gave him strength and courage and optimism and hope. So as he described, he went to the examination without fear. Because God is with me. This is what he felt. And the examiners were aggressive, but he had the courage to say no and not to be scared. At the end, everything ended very well, and he was released. So this is what religious people, what people of faith are getting from God. This is how they experience God. God is giving strength and meaning and optimism and hope and forgiveness and love and many, many, many other gifts. This is how we experience communication with God. Faith is not a pure God's gift. No. God is calling and we are responding to God. And through this response, or in this response, we are throwing our weight on a metaphorical scale, and we choose to believe. Now let me clarify this a bit. You can explain everything happening in the nature, society, history, philosophy, from a believer's and non-believer's perspective, logically, philosophically. You can everything explain. This is happening in the world. So also atheists have an explanation, okay? And we have an explanation. As though in this metaphorical scale, the two sides, the believer and the non-believer, as though they are in balance. However, the believer throws all his or her weight, all his or her personality, or his or her trust on one end of the scale, on believer's end of the scale. And this is what faith is. It is trusting God. And this trust is then proven by receiving the gifts of the faith, hope, trust, optimism, meaning, purpose, values, and so on and so on. This is what is missing from people suffering of godless life. This is what we have. This is what we can give them. Okay, how can we give those gifts to the world? How can we witness them? Not by logic, not by arguments, not by overwhelming them with proofs, I experience many times in my practice, I can discuss things. I can logically prove and press my opponent in the corner. At the end, he or she will say, okay, you are right, I give up. In the same moment, when he leaves or she leaves my office, she will have or he will come back with new arguments, as though nothing happened, even better arguments. So not logic helps, but reasons of heart is this what helps. We can convince people and we can evangelize people using not logic and arguments, but the reasons of heart. You understand what I mean? So evangelizing is not an event, not an argument, not discussing, but a process. It is a process. It is a relationship. It is a dialogue. It is a communication where the snapshot is unimportant, the process is important. Okay? This is how we share our faith to our children, to our friends, on our workplace, and so on and so on. Let me illustrate this with an anecdotal story. According to one story, it was a habit in an Indian or Mediterranean family that the father gave always a ring to his son, whom he thought is the best. However, one father had many sons, and he couldn't decide who is the best son. And so he went and made a few more identical rings. So every son got a ring. However, after the death of the father, the sons discovered that everyone has a ring. So they couldn't decide whose ring is the original. And they went to a wise man and asked, how could we decide now, how could we know who has the original ring? And the wise man was silent for a while and thinking. And after a while he responded, it is not important now to prove which is the original ring, but every one of you can prove with your life that you have the original ring. You understand what I mean? With your life, you are proving, I have the original ring. I have the good faith. I am close to Jesus. I am on the right way to Jesus. Okay? So this is the way how we can evangelize the postmodern world suffering of godless life. Now, thank you for listening me. You were patient with me. I wanted to make nice projections and so on and so on. And in my fear, I even forgot to draw, okay? But we survived. And thank you for this. And please now invent questions after a break, and then we will continue. Thank you.